Something is happening in Cleveland that the people closest to the situation seem desperate to pretend isn't real. You can feel it in the way certain reporters choose their words carefully. You can sense it in the awkward silences after practice wraps up. And you can absolutely see it in the footage coming out of OTAs, footage that, depending on who threw those passes, would either be replayed on every sports network in the country or quietly buried before anyone got a good look. The Cleveland Browns are standing at a crossroads they never wanted to reach this early, and the man at the center of it all is a quarterback who is supposed to walk back into that facility and remind everyone exactly why he was worth every single penny of the most controversial contract in NFL history. Instead, what the world is watching unfold in real time is something far more uncomfortable, a slow, painful unraveling that no amount of careful media framing can fully hide. The story isn't just about bad passes, it's about trust, momentum, money, and the terrifying possibility that the wrong quarterback might already be winning this battle before it was ever officially declared a battle. In Jimmy Haslam, he has to be watching every single rep with his stomach in knots, because what's happening on that practice field is starting to look a lot less like a temporary rough patch and a whole lot more like the beginning of something the Browns organization is completely unprepared to deal with. So let's talk about what's actually going on. The full picture, the context that some people conveniently leave out, and the reason why this moment feels so much heavier than just another slow day at OTAs. It was supposed to be routine. Organized team activities are exactly what the name implies. Structured, controlled, low-stakes work sessions designed to build chemistry and sharpen timing. No pads, no full contact, no game pressure, just quarterbacks, receivers, and coaches working through the playbook in a setting that should, theoretically, be the easiest environment possible for a veteran signal caller to look sharp and confident. That's what made what happened so impossible to brush off. Deshaun Watson stepped onto that field carrying the weight of an entire city's desperate, exhausted hope. 4 years of injuries, questions, and near-constant controversy had beaten that fan base into a fragile state of cautious optimism. All they needed was for Watson to come out and look like a quarterback, look in command, look like the guy they were sold on when Haslam handed over that historic, fully guaranteed contract. Instead, the ball started going to the wrong team. First, it was an overthrow. Then a tipped ball that hung in the air just long enough for the defense to react. Then came the interceptions. Not just one moment of miscommunication, not just one bad read, but a pattern of mistakes that built on each other in the worst possible way. Watson dropped back, surveyed the field, and released a pass with the kind of hesitation that tells you something isn't quite right in his processing. The timing was off. The ball floated. A defender tracked it, broke on it, and picked it off cleanly. The defense erupted. The offense went quiet. And somewhere in the back of everyone's mind, the same uncomfortable thought took root. This doesn't look like a quarterback who's figured it out. What makes this so significant isn't just the interceptions themselves. Quarterbacks throw interceptions. Even the great ones have bad days in practice. What makes this alarming is the context. Watson wasn't doing this in a vacuum. He was doing it in front of head coach Todd Monken. He was doing it while a young quarterback stood nearby, watching, waiting, and quietly making the most of every single rep he was given. And he was doing it at a time when the Cleveland Browns absolutely cannot afford to look fractured, uncertain, or headed in the wrong direction. The pressure heading into this season was already enormous. Watson's performance in that practice didn't relieve any of that pressure, it multiplied it. There's a moment in any quarterback competition, even one that isn't officially a competition yet, where the narrative shifts. It doesn't always happen with a press conference or a formal announcement. Sometimes it happens on a random Tuesday in June, when a pass hangs too long and the wrong hands come away with the ball. That might have been that moment for Cleveland, and the truly unsettling part is that most people covering the team acted like it barely happened at all. Here's where the story gets genuinely strange. When a quarterback throws multiple interceptions in practice, even in OTAs, it tends to generate conversation. Analysts talk about it, beat reporters ask questions, fans clip the footage and post it everywhere. The sports media machine, which runs on exactly this kind of drama, typically devours moments like this. So why was the reaction from certain corners of the Cleveland media landscape so noticeably muted?
Think about the obvious comparison for a second. Imagine for a moment that Shedeur Sanders, the young rookie with everything to prove, the guy fighting from the bottom of the depth chart, had gone out there and thrown those same interceptions. Picture it clearly. The football world would have had a field day. Every sports talk show from here to the coasts would have been running the clips on loop. The narrative would have been immediate and brutal. Rookie struggles, confirms worst fears, not ready for NFL. It would have been everywhere within the hour. But when Watson is the one making those mistakes, suddenly the tone shifts. Suddenly it's let's not overreact. Suddenly it's these are just OTAs. Suddenly the footage gets a fraction of the attention it would have received if the names and reputations were reversed. And that's selective framing. Whether it's intentional or just the product of years of narrative investment in Watson's comeback story, is itself a story worth examining. Now, to be fair, some of the measured reaction is understandable on the surface. OTAs genuinely are low stakes. No pads, no game speed, no full defensive schemes being deployed. There's a legitimate argument to be made that reading too much into any single practice in June is a stretch. But here's the thing, that argument only works if you're applying it consistently to everyone on the field. And the pattern of who gets scrutinized and who gets protected in Cleveland's media coverage has been too obvious for too long to just wave away as coincidence. The silence around Watson's mistakes isn't neutrality, it's a choice. And choices like that always reveal something about what people are actually afraid of. What Cleveland's closest observers seem afraid of, at least based on what they're choosing not to say, is the possibility that Watson is genuinely struggling, not in a still shaking off rust way, not in a give him time to get comfortable way, but in a deeper, more fundamental way that raises real questions about where this team is headed. Because if you acknowledge that the interceptions are concerning, then you have to acknowledge what's happening on the other side of that depth chart. And that's a conversation that makes a lot of people in that building very, very uncomfortable. While Watson was handing the ball to the opposition, something else was happening on that same practice field that deserves just as much attention as the turnovers, maybe more. Shedeur Sanders was working, quietly, efficiently, and with the kind of composure that you simply cannot fake in a professional football environment. No desperate heaves, no late reads, no floating passes out there waiting to get picked off. Just clean, decisive football from a young quarterback who looks increasingly like he belongs at this level. The contrast between the two players in these practices has become impossible to ignore for anyone watching with clear eyes. Watson looks uncertain. He drops back and there's a hesitation in his process, a beat too long before he pulls the trigger, a slightly off-target release, a tendency to force throws into coverage that a quarterback operating with full confidence would never attempt. The mechanics are there, the arm talent is there, but something in the connection between his eyes, his mind, and his delivery is fractured in a way that practice reps alone may not be able to fix. Shedeur looks different. When he's running an offense, the whole unit seems to breathe a little easier. The ball comes out quicker, the decisions are cleaner. There's a rhythm to the way he operates that translates directly into a more functional offense. Receivers run their routes knowing the ball is going to be where it's supposed to be. The line protects with more confidence when the quarterback behind them looks like he knows exactly where he's going with the football. That energy is real, and it is contagious, and right now it's spreading through that Browns offense in a way that has to be making the coaching staff ask themselves some very uncomfortable questions. This is the thing about legitimate quarterback competition that teams always underestimate. It doesn't stay contained. The moment a backup starts generating real energy and real confidence in a locker room, it becomes nearly impossible to put that back in a box. Players talk. Guys on the offensive line notice who's making their jobs easier. Wide receivers notice who's putting the ball where they can catch it without getting killed. The culture of an NFL team is constantly being shaped and reshaped by the dynamics playing out on the practice field. And right now, the dynamic in Cleveland is shifting in a direction that nobody in that front office was prepared for when they built their offseason plan around Deshaun Watson reclaiming his starting job. Shedeur Sanders hasn't said anything inflammatory. He hasn't done any post-game media tours declaring himself the better option. He hasn't needed to. Every clean rep he takes, every crisp throw he completes, every drive he moves efficiently down the field is doing more talking than any press conference ever could. And in professional football, that's the only currency that ultimately matters.
Let's talk about the elephant in the room, the one that's been sitting in the middle of Cleveland's football decisions for years now, getting bigger and more unavoidable with every passing season. Deshaun Watson's contract is one of the most extraordinary financial commitments in the history of professional sports. Fully guaranteed, historic in its size and its structure, a statement by Jimmy Haslam that he was betting everything on this quarterback's ability to deliver the Browns to relevance. And here's the brutal reality of what that contract does to a franchise when things start going sideways. It makes every single decision exponentially more complicated. In the NFL, teams cut players and move on from mistakes all the time. That's the nature of the business. But when you've handed a player that kind of fully guaranteed money, the calculus changes completely. You're not just making a football decision, you're making a financial decision, a PR decision, and an organizational identity decision all at the same time. Every time someone suggests the Browns should move on from Watson or give Shedeur a real shot, the contract looms over the conversation like a storm cloud that won't move. Haslam has to be living with the full weight of that reality right now. The interceptions in practice aren't just bad football moments, they're expensive bad football moments. Every overthrow, every turnover, every shaky rep from the quarterback he paid a king's ransom for is a reminder that the most important transaction in Cleveland Browns history might be the one that ends up defining the franchise in the worst possible way. And the cruelest part of it all is that there's nothing he can do to change the math. The money is owed regardless. The question is simply whether Watson is going to give him anything on the field worth enduring the financial pain for. 4 years into this experiment, the returns have been devastatingly insufficient. Injuries have derailed multiple seasons. The performances, when Watson has been available, have not matched the billing that accompanied his arrival. The fresh start narrative has been recycled so many times that it barely registers anymore. And now, in what was supposed to be the season where everything finally came together, the quarterback at the center of Cleveland's enormous financial bet is throwing interceptions in a no-pads practice while a rookie outperforms him in real time. The people running that organization have to be asking themselves, in whatever private moments they allow themselves to be completely honest, whether they made the worst mistake in franchise history. And the fact that the answer to that question is becoming clearer by the day is exactly what makes this situation so charged. Cleveland is a football city, the kind of place where the sport isn't just entertainment, it's identity, community, and collective emotional investment all wrapped into one. Browns fans have endured more disappointment than most fan bases could survive, and they've done it with a kind of stubborn loyalty that deserves genuine respect. But loyalty has limits, patience has limits, and when those limits get reached by a fan base as passionate and invested as Cleveland's, the shift is sudden and it is total. That shift is happening right now. You can hear it in the way conversations have changed. A year ago, the prevailing sentiment around Watson was cautious optimism. Maybe this year will be different. Maybe he's finally healthy. Maybe the circumstances just haven't been right. That framing has almost entirely evaporated. What's replaced it isn't just frustration, it's something more final, a conclusion that a significant portion of the fan base has quietly arrived at and is no longer afraid to say out loud, they're done waiting, they're done hoping, they've seen enough. And what they want instead is right there on the same practice field, taking reps, making plays, and looking more and more like the answer to a question the Browns organization keeps pretending they don't need to ask.
Prominent local voices have started saying it plainly. When people who cover this team for a living, people who have years of credibility with the Cleveland fan base and understand the full context of this situation, start going on record saying they'd rather see Shedeur Sanders play, that's not just commentary, that's a signal. That's the local football establishment reflecting back the frustration of an entire city that has decided it's time for a change. And here's what makes this moment different from all the previous moments of Watson frustration. Those moments always had a cushion. There was always an injury to point to, a circumstance to cite, a reason to pump the brakes on the criticism and remind everyone that the sample size was too small to draw real conclusions. There's no cushion now. What's happening in these OTAs is straightforward. Two quarterbacks are competing in the same environment with the same conditions. One looks sharp and in control, the other looks lost, and the fans watching can see it as clearly as anyone else.
The excuses are running out, the patience is gone, and the city of Cleveland is getting louder by the day about what it actually wants to see happen with this quarterback situation. There's a conversation happening around Deshaun Watson that reveals something particularly telling about where this whole thing stands. People close to the situation have reportedly suggested that Watson needs to approach his media interactions differently, that he needs to show more humility, more self-awareness, more accountability for the 4 years of disappointment that have defined his Cleveland tenure. The suggestion, essentially, is that someone had to coach him on how to be publicly humble about what's happened. Think about what that actually means for a moment. We're not talking about a young quarterback learning the ropes of NFL media relations for the first time. Watson is a veteran. He's been through the full gauntlet of professional football scrutiny. He knows how press conferences work, how narrative shapes public perception, and what fans need to hear from a player who is under-delivered. And yet, the suggestion exists that he needs external guidance to navigate the concept of accountability after 4 years of results that didn't come close to the promise of his contract. That's not a media strategy problem. That's a reflection of a much deeper disconnect. When a quarterback who has been given everything, money, opportunity, patience, and repeated fresh starts still needs to be advised on how to demonstrate that he understands his own responsibility for what's gone wrong, it tells you something about the gap between how he processes his situation and how the rest of the world is experiencing it. And that gap, invisible as it might seem from the outside, has real consequences for how a team rallies around a leader. Quarterbacks lead, not just with their arm, not just with their football IQ, but with their accountability, their self-awareness, and their ability to make the people around them believe in them, even when things are hard. The best quarterbacks in NFL history have all shared that quality, a willingness to stand at the podium after a bad game and take full responsibility, without deflection, without excuse, without making anyone around them feel like they're carrying a burden that should be shared. Watson, by all accounts of this current period, hasn't quite found that footing yet, and when you combine that leadership gap with the on-field struggles showing up in practice, the overall picture is one of a quarterback who is fighting battles on multiple fronts simultaneously and losing ground on most of them. That's the part of this story that gets lost when the conversation stays purely focused on the football. The interceptions are the symptom. The underlying issue is something harder to fix with extra reps or adjusted footwork. It's about a quarterback's relationship with his own narrative, and right now, that relationship is making things harder, not easier, for everyone involved. Let's step back from the opinions and the media dynamics for a second and just look at what the actual football record says about this situation, because sometimes when emotions are running this high, it helps to anchor the conversation in something concrete. The facts of Deshaun Watson's Cleveland tenure are not ambiguous. They are not open to creative interpretation. They are what they are, and they paint a picture that his most vocal defenders are going to have an increasingly difficult time arguing against. Since arriving in Cleveland, Watson has missed significant time due to injury in multiple seasons. The games he has played have produced results that, for a quarterback of his supposed caliber and price tag, have been deeply underwhelming.
The team hasn't made the kind of leap that typically follows the acquisition of a franchise quarterback at the price Cleveland paid. The offense has been inconsistent at best and dysfunctional at worst across large stretches of his tenure. And the injuries themselves, particularly the Achilles injury that cost him most of recent seasons, have raised legitimate questions not just about his current form, but about whether he can hold up physically over the course of a full NFL season at this stage of his career. Meanwhile, the film from these OTAs is telling its own story. Overthrows, interceptions, passes that hang in the air a beat too long, telegraphing exactly where Watson intends to go with the ball before he releases it. These are not the mistakes of a quarterback who is locked in and operating at peak efficiency. These are the mistakes of a quarterback who is still searching for his timing, his confidence, his connection with the offense, and something that resembles the form that made him worth betting on in the first place. And the searching is visible. Players on the defensive side of the ball can see it. Coaches can see it. The film doesn't lie, and right now, the film is making a very uncomfortable argument.
Compare that to what the film shows when Shedeur Sanders is taking reps. Completions, decisions made quickly and accurately, an offense that functions the way an offense is supposed to function when the quarterback is in command of the moment. You don't need an advanced analytics degree to see the difference. You just need to watch. And the people who are paid to watch very carefully in Cleveland are watching and drawing conclusions, whether they're sharing those conclusions publicly or keeping them internal for now. The football argument for staying with Watson is getting harder to make with each passing practice, and the football argument for giving Shedeur a genuine opportunity to prove what he can do is getting louder and more evidence-based by the day. There's a point in every slow-building crisis where the pressure crosses a threshold and the conversation stops being theoretical. It stops being what if and maybe, and we'll see how it develops. It becomes immediate and real, and impossible to manage with careful PR language and measured public statements. Cleveland is approaching that threshold with every practice that produces the same result. Watson struggling, Shedeur impressing, the gap between them refusing to close. When that threshold gets crossed, teams are forced to make decisions they've been actively avoiding, and the decision the Cleveland Browns are avoiding right now is one of the most expensive and complicated in recent NFL memory. It's not just about who starts at quarterback in week 1 of the regular season, although obviously that matters enormously. It's about the entire organizational narrative that's been built around Watson's presence on the roster. It's about the financial structure of a contract that was supposed to represent Cleveland's arrival as a serious contender. It's about Jimmy Haslam's legacy as an owner and his willingness or unwillingness to look honestly at what the evidence is telling him. The Browns have stayed loyal to Watson through a lot, through the controversy that preceded his Cleveland arrival, through the suspension, through the injuries, through the underperformance, through the repeated seasons where a fresh start was promised and a disappointing outcome was delivered. That loyalty has come with enormous cost, financial, reputational, and competitive. And right now, on a practice field in June, the question of whether that loyalty is still justifiable is getting harder and harder to answer with a straight face. History is full of NFL franchises that held on too long to the wrong quarterback because the financial and emotional investment was too large to walk away from. The cap hits were too painful, the ego investment was too significant, the organizational pride made it impossible to admit a mistake. And in every single one of those cases, the team paid a price that went beyond money. It cost them years of competitive relevance, fan trust, and the players who could have been built around a different, better quarterback while the window was still open. Cleveland cannot afford to be the next chapter in that story. Not with a defense that still has legitimate pieces, not with the offensive weapons they have available, not with a rookie quarterback on the roster who is raising his hand every single day and asking to be given a real chance. The pressure is building, the evidence is piling up, the fan base has made their feelings clear, and the football argument for the status quo is evaporating with every overthrow, every interception, every practice where Shedeur Sanders walks off the field having outperformed the quarterback who is supposed to be unchallengeable for his job. Something has to give, and when it does, the only question anyone will be asking is why it took as long as it did.
There's a particular kind of power in someone who lets their work do all the talking, while the people around them are drowning in noise. Shedeur Sanders has mastered that dynamic in Cleveland without apparently even trying. While the debate rages, while the media circles the situation, while Watson's supporters and critics argue about what the interceptions mean and don't mean, Shedeur has simply been showing up and performing, day after day, rep after rep. Clean, confident, professional football from a young quarterback who is rapidly running out of reasons to be treated as anything other than a legitimate contender for the starting job. The storyline coming into the season around Shedeur was complicated in ways that had nothing to do with football. His last name carries enormous weight. His father is one of the most polarizing figures in football. The questions about whether he was being evaluated on his merits or being given preferential treatment, or conversely, being held to an unfairly high standard because of who his family is, were swirling before he ever took a snap in a professional setting. All of that noise created a kind of static around him that made it difficult for some observers to simply watch him play and assess what they were seeing objectively.
What they're seeing when they push all that static aside and just look at the football is a quarterback who is making it increasingly difficult to justify keeping him off the field. The accuracy is real. The pocket presence is mature beyond his experience level. The decision-making under pressure, the ability to go through reads, process what the defense is giving him, and deliver the ball to the right place at the right time, is exactly what you want to see from a young quarterback trying to prove he belongs. He doesn't look like someone who's fighting for scraps and hoping not to make mistakes. He looks like someone who fully expects to succeed and is mildly confused when the conversation around him stays focused on someone else. That confidence is not arrogance. There's a distinction worth making here. Arrogance in a young quarterback tends to manifest as poor decision-making, unnecessary risks, and an inability to process criticism or adjust. What Shedeur is showing is different. It's the confidence of a player who has done the preparation, trusts his own abilities, and is now simply waiting for the opportunity to demonstrate what he's capable of at this level. That's not a bad thing for a team to have in its quarterback room. That's actually exactly what you want. And the Browns are sitting on it, watching it develop, and for reasons that seem increasingly tied to financial and ego considerations rather than football logic, declining to fully unlock it. Every story like this one has a breaking point, a specific moment or series of moments where the prevailing narrative cracks and the conversation that everyone has been having around the edges suddenly moves to the center. For Cleveland's quarterback situation, that breaking point may be closer than the organization is ready to acknowledge. The signs are all there. The growing chorus of fans who have moved from frustration to conclusion. The media voices who have started saying plainly what they'd previously only implied. The practice footage that keeps circulating on social media, regardless of how many measured statements get issued about it being just OTAs. The visible difference in energy between the two quarterbacks every single time they're both on the field at the same time, and perhaps most significantly, the complete absence of any compelling counter-narrative, any evidence that Watson is turning the corner, finding his rhythm, or recapturing even a fraction of the form that made him worth the investment in the first place. Breaking points in sports are interesting because they almost never feel inevitable until after they've happened. In the moment, there are always reasons to believe the status quo will hold. The team is committed. The money is guaranteed. The organization has publicly stated its position. Changing course means admitting error and absorbing the fallout. All of those factors create enormous institutional inertia towards simply staying the course and hoping things turn around on their own. But the history of the NFL is littered with franchises that let that inertia carry them past the point of no return, past the moment where a difficult decision could have changed the trajectory of a season, into the moment where the difficult decision was no longer even a choice because the situation had already resolved itself badly. Cleveland is not there yet. The season hasn't started. Training camp hasn't opened. The reps are still happening, the evaluation is still ongoing, and in theory, the door is still open for Watson to reassert himself and for this conversation to shift back in a direction more favorable to the Browns' current plans. But every practice where the story stays the same makes that theoretical possibility feel a little more distant, and every practice where Shedeur Sanders adds another good day to his growing body of work makes the decision that everyone is pretending doesn't need to be made feel a little more urgent. The Browns are going to have to make a call, maybe not today, maybe not in the next week, but before this season begins, they are going to have to look clearly at what is happening on their own practice field and decide what kind of football team they want to be. Do they want to be a team that honors financial commitments and organizational loyalty above all else, even when the football argument for doing so has largely dissolved? Or do they want to be a team that makes the hard call, absorbs the short-term pain of admitting a mistake, and builds something real around the quarterback who is actually earning the opportunity every single day? That's the question Jimmy Haslam is going to have to answer, and the way things are trending in Cleveland right now, he's going to have to answer it a lot sooner than he'd like.
Step back from the specifics of this situation for a moment and consider what it represents in the broader context of how NFL teams make decisions about quarterbacks. The Deshaun Watson situation in Cleveland is, at its core, a story about what happens when an organization becomes so invested in a narrative, the "we finally found our franchise quarterback" narrative, that it loses the ability to evaluate reality clearly. It's a cautionary tale about guaranteed contracts and the way they distort decision-making at every level of an organization. And it's a story about what happens when the right answer and the comfortable answer diverge so sharply that choosing between them feels genuinely impossible. Every NFL franchise deals with quarterback questions at some point. The great organizations, the ones that sustain success over decades, are the ones that can step back from the emotional and financial weight of their quarterback investments and just ask the simple question, who gives us the best chance to win? Not who deserves it more, not who we've invested more in, not whose contract makes it more comfortable to keep them around, just who is actually performing better and giving us the best chance to succeed. Cleveland's struggle to ask and answer that question honestly is not unique. We've seen it in other cities with other quarterbacks. The specifics change, but the dynamic is always the same. A big investment, a disappointing return, a young challenger emerging, and an organization paralyzed by its own prior commitments. What makes Cleveland's version of this story particularly intense is the scale of everything involved. The contract is bigger, the controversy surrounding Watson's arrival was bigger, the expectations attached to his success were bigger, and therefore the difficulty of making the honest football call is bigger than it would be for virtually any other team in any other situation. But here's the thing. The difficulty of making a decision doesn't change the nature of the decision itself. It doesn't change what the practice footage shows. It doesn't change what the statistics say about Watson's Cleveland tenure. It doesn't change the energy of a team that looks different, better, and more confident when a certain young quarterback is running the offense. The truth doesn't adjust itself to accommodate organizational discomfort. It just sits there, getting louder and more undeniable until someone in a position of authority finally has the courage to acknowledge it out loud. The NFL has always rewarded teams that make that acknowledgement sooner rather than later. It has always punished teams that waited too long, that stayed loyal to the wrong player for the wrong reasons, that let pride and sunk cost in organizational politics override the fundamental football logic staring them in the face. Cleveland has a choice right now. The choice they make, or don't make, will define this franchise for years to come. Here's where everything lands when you strip away the noise and just look at what's actually happening.
A quarterback competition that the Cleveland Browns never officially declared is being decided anyway. Not in press conferences, not in front office meetings, not in the carefully worded public statements from coaches and general managers. It's being decided on a practice field in Ohio, one rep at a time, by two quarterbacks whose trajectories are moving in exactly opposite directions. Deshaun Watson is struggling, not spectacularly, not catastrophically, but steadily, visibly, and in the ways that matter most for a quarterback trying to hold on to a starting job. The ball isn't coming out clean. The decisions are taking a beat too long. The turnovers are happening in environments where they shouldn't, in front of people who notice everything, at a time when the margin for error has shrunk to nearly nothing. And the most damaging part isn't any individual mistake, it's the cumulative picture that all those mistakes paint together. A quarterback who is searching, a quarterback who doesn't quite look like he's found it yet, a quarterback whose best days, if they're still out there, feel further away every time he takes a snap, and the result is something other than what his team desperately needs. Shedeur Sanders is building. Every clean throw, every efficiently managed drive, every practiced rep where the ball goes where it's supposed to go and the offense functions the way it's supposed to function, all of it is adding up to a body of evidence that is getting impossible to dismiss or explain away. He's not just a development project anymore. He's not just a curiosity or a draft storyline or a name that generates interest for reasons beyond football. He is a quarterback who is outperforming the starter in practice, and in the NFL, what happens in practice eventually follows you onto the field.
The field has already started delivering its verdict. The fans have started delivering theirs. The media voices closest to the situation have started delivering theirs. The only verdict that hasn't been formally rendered yet is the one from the front office in the coaching staff, the people who have the authority to make the change that everything else is pointing toward. And the longer they wait to render that verdict, the more it will look like the decision was made for them rather than by them. Cleveland deserves better than that. The fan base that has stuck with this team through everything deserves to see their organization make a clear-eyed, honest football decision without waiting until the situation becomes so untenable that there's no other choice. They deserve to see a quarterback who looks like he wants to be there, who looks like he belongs, who makes the people around him better and gives the offense the kind of energy that wins football games in the NFL. Whether the organization will give them that before training camp opens, before the first preseason game kicks off, or before the regular season forces the issue remains to be seen. But one thing is certain, the longer the Watson era continues without the kind of turnaround that would actually justify it, the more expensive the delay becomes. Not just in dollars, which are already committed regardless, but in time, in trust, in wins that don't happen, in seasons that slip away, and in the slow erosion of belief from a fan base that has already had its belief tested far beyond what should be reasonable. The clock is ticking in Cleveland. The evidence is on the field, and the question that everyone already knows the answer to is waiting for someone to say it loud enough that the people making the decisions can no longer pretend they didn't hear it. If you made it this far, you already know where you stand on this. Drop your take in the comments. Do you ride with Watson for one more shot, or is it already Shedeur's team? Hit subscribe because this story is nowhere near finished, and when the next move happens in Cleveland, you're gonna want to be here for it.